All right. Thanks everyone who is attending today's session. I'm going to introduce Roger McCarty. He's going to be speaking to you about his method for matching students into projects, so what he calls rating. And I've been doing this for a long time. I know a lot of schools, including a lot of you and the audience. And so I'm familiar with a lot of experiential programs. It's not that often I hear about something new with matching students to projects, but that's what this was, at least for me. I had never heard of this rating concept and sounded really interesting. We actually just built support for it in our platform. So I'll talk about that at the end. But Roger, I met when he was director of experiential at BYU. And then now he is at BYU Hawaii, bringing all those years of expertise. I want to say the number, but I feel like I'll get it wrong, but we'll say 15 plus. Roger can correct me, to BYU Hawaii so they can benefit from that. So he's standing up or has stood up the experiential program there. So with all of that, Roger, I'm going to turn it over to you and talk to us about rating versus ranking.
Thank you. Yeah, we did. I started back in 2007 with an MBA program at BYU, and I started with ranking students. And then in 2008, we added undergraduates, and we were between the MBA and the undergraduates. We were running about 150 students. And then within a couple of years, we were running about 400 students. And in a couple more years, we were 500 to 1,000 students per semester. And so that became, as we grew the number of students, obviously we had to grow the number of projects also. Now, when a student is looking at 50 or 100 or 200 projects, trying to rank all of those becomes ridiculous. Actually, I think it comes hard anywhere after 5 or 10. I find that students begin to basically rank their first few that they care about, and then they just kind of randomly rank the rest. But the trouble is, we don't know that. We don't know whether they're ranking or how that works. And so at some point, we began saying, we need to fix this. This is too hard. And we came, and I'll tell you in this presentation how we came up with that. But that's kind of our background and experience here. I've taken personally more than 10,000 students through experiential learning semester-long project teams. And so we've done a lot of things wrong, and we've done a few things right. And this is one of the right things that we've done as we've gone through that.
And I just want to cut in real quick for anyone listening. As we go, if you have questions, feel free to submit. We'll keep an eye on that. And Roger, I want to zero in on what you just said, that, yes, you work at the large end of the spectrum of scale. Most programs aren't that big. Some are, but most of them are. But you feel this rating methodology is helpful, even if you're dealing with only 5 or 10 projects are around there, right?
Let's talk about that. Since my background is I worked for 30 years at Dow Chemical Company and did a number of things there. But during that time, I recruited students for 18 years while I was there as an executive, going back to my alma mater. So I was involved with a lot of students. And so when I retired in 2007, I wanted to help out at the university. I ended up working there for 10 years doing this kind of stuff. And that's a large university, about 33,000 undergraduates. When I retired from that, I was asked to come here to BYU Hawaii, which I came about 2.5 years ago. And I've been doing this here. Now, this is a much smaller university. There's only about 3,000 students. And so when we've run projects, we have run we're running 17 projects this semester. So 5 to 17 is what we've kind of run here at BYU Hawaii. So we are running the smaller ones, but I will tell you, it is still much easier, even on the small ones, to run the rating versus the ranking. And I'll explain why as we go into this. But thank you, Dave. So that makes sense. So let's start through this. So my belief is students do better working on projects in which they're interested. That's not a wise golden nugget that nobody's ever thought about before, but it's totally true. And it makes a huge impact on how the students work as we go through projects. They have more energy to focus on the project when they're interested. They're more excited about the outcome. They feel more investment in their experience because they believe it will help them. And I can tell you, students who don't think they're being helped by it, their energy and their commitment level drops off dramatically. They feel they're making a contribution or making a difference in the world. And a lot of students pick a project not so much because it's their major or because they think it's going to help them find a job. A lot of students pick a project because they think it's going to change the world or it's going to make an impact. And so you don't know when you're taking a student whether they're being driven by career, they're being driven by, are they being driven by the chance to get a job? Are they being driven by experience to be better in their career? Or are they being driven by what's going to impact them and in their ability to impact the world? These things all can make a big difference. They feel they're valued and being enabled to have a great experience because someone cared enough to ask them what they wanted and then acted on that information. That impacts their commitment to the project. All right, so ranking's been around for a long time. Ranking has been the gold standard for preference identification. The process is understood by most people. It's easy to implement. Everyone just ranks the projects from top to bottom. So this is why I started using ranking, and I did it in a spreadsheet, and I had all the students listed, and I had all the projects listed. I had the students rank them, and then I went down and tried to put students on their 1, 2, or 3 ranked projects and tried to work it out. That's how I started. And as long as there's not too many projects, the students can rank 10 or less projects quickly and easily, and it's not a big deal. But what if there are 30 plus projects or even 100 plus projects? So in that situation, ranking really does become much more difficult and complex. The students have to keep all of those projects in their head and choose between them, and they have to rank all of them. So certainly as you go up to larger numbers of projects, rating becomes way more important. But even at the lower numbers, it still has a value. Now, where I learned about this was from Dr. Scott Sampson. Scott, I went to talk to him about building an algorithm where it could preferentially place the students in the projects. I never ended up using it, but I went to talk to him about it because I knew that was his area of expertise. Dr. Sampson is a professor at Brigham Young University in the Marriott School of Business. So I asked him about this, and he asked me how I was doing it, and I told him the ranking that I was using. And this is basically the statement he told me. He said, ranking forces ordinality, which is that there is only one first choice, only one second choice, and one third choice, etc. And the difference between each choice and the next lower choice is exactly fixed. This provides a horribly small target for maximum satisfaction, i.e. anything less than the first choice is suboptimal. Now, he told me that he gained a lot of understanding about this when he was working as a consultant for timeshare companies, who, when people would input their preference to go to a timeshare other than their home timeshare, they would put in their preferences of things that they would like to go to. And they were using ordinality, they were using ranking. And when they checked for satisfaction, they found basically, even if a person didn't care much between the first 2, 3, or 4, if you didn't give them their number 1, they weren't satisfied because you forced them to tell you what the number 1 was. And once you forced them to tell you, now they think that's their most important, even though they didn't think so when they were originally considering the options.
So you're creating a two-way feedback loop. Is that what you're saying? That you're asking the students for their feedback where they want to go, but then they're kind of giving themselves feedback to say, yes, I want to go here as my first choice, but because they made it 1 and the next one has to be down the road at 2, it's circular reasoning, but it actually applies here. Is that what you're saying?
It totally applies. You're exactly right. On the other hand, if you have a simple rating, such as preferred, acceptable, and unacceptable, then students can list a bunch of preferred options, and it becomes a big target to satisfy. You might have students rank within the preferred category, or even better, allocate 1,000 points across the preferred options to distinguish, but still treat any preferred option that is granted as a success. So that's a statement that he sent me recently to, I reached out to him to remind him of our conversation back in probably 2000, probably 8 or 9, probably 9 or 10 in that time frame. And so he sent me this statement as just kind of a reminder of what he had talked about. But I vividly remember that conversation, and it changed the way that I thought about these things. So let's look at what that means. And again, if anybody has questions as we go through, don't hesitate. So how does ratings work? And in this case, I think David wants to call it scoring, and I really don't care what you call it. But how does it work when you try and understand what they really think, not forcing them into some arbitrary ordinality of ranking? So you have levels of interest defined for the students to use. Now, I like a 5-point scale, and the one I use and have used for 13 years or whatever, is very high interest, moderate interest, low interest, and no interest. No interest means I'd rather drop the course than work on this project. I got to tell you, I'm kind of more of a fan of not required courses. When you get a required course, you get students in there who really don't want to be there, and they're only doing it because you're forcing them to get their degree.
There are kind of competing reasons I think schools might go in the direction of required. We measure each year in our benchmarking survey, and we just opened this year. So at the end, you'll have a link if you wish to participate. But as far as I know, it's the biggest data set in the world for experiential programs. It's about 100 schools a year. One of the questions we ask is, are you required? And off the top of my head, I believe in the last few years, it's increased the requirement. And that has sort of institutional value. But yeah, when it comes to what we're talking about here, getting students into projects they want to work on, which is what I think we're talking about, letting them opt in at all levels has to be, the gold standard.
Yeah, particularly if you're requiring it, now getting them on a project they really care about is even more important, because they can't drop the course. So what I do is I default on the system that I created before we were using here, is I forced them to, everything went to no interest. So in this case, I ranked from 1 to 5, and number 5 was no interest. And I defaulted all votes to no interest. And so what happened then is, unless they moved it off of no interest, then it was ignored. Everything became no interest. So one of the things a student could do is they could filter the projects down to just their major or just an industry or whatever it was, that filters that were available in the system. So there might be 200 projects, but once they filtered it, they may only be looking at 20 projects. And now on those 20 projects, they only had to rate those 20 projects. The other 180 were all left at no interest. That's why I like the default. But even on a smaller system, where you're only doing 10 or 15 projects, you still have the ability to have this no interest, so that the students only are moving the ones that they really care about. Now, you may look at this and say, well, am I setting myself up for failure here by having this very high, moderate interest, et cetera? So I have to tell you, I've used this system on small groups of students, and I've used them on large groups of students. My experience is that students have a wide variety of things that they care about. And because of that, laughingly, I can never guess which projects are going to be the most popular. It's, sometimes a big name will capture a bunch of people who want to do it. And then another, Marsha, would you answer? Another group would be, there's a big thing that changes the world or whatever. Those things become really kind of important. And so people want different things. So because of that, I'm often very able to have a lot of different people wanting different projects. And because of that, I find that in general, I'm able to have 80 to 90% of the people get the very high interest project. Then normally 95+% end up getting either a high interest or a very high interest. I normally only have a small percentage of the people who end up with a moderate interest. In over 10,000 students that I've put through these programs, I've never had anybody that I've put on a low interest project, not even once. And I've never put anybody on a no interest. Now, I will say that there is one thing that I have done, and I think this could be a problem. I don't think it's a problem, but I just want to point it out. There have been a few times when a student really put in projects relate to their background, don't relate to their experience. They've just picked a big name and they've got nothing else. And so I've called them and said, okay, talk to me. You've got this one thing listed. It's not related to you at all. It's not related to your major. You have no experience in this area. Why are you doing this? And we'd talk. And then we'd talk about what would really help you, what would be valuable. And then we'd discuss a number of different projects that could actually really help them. And then they said, you know what, I think you're right. I want to change my my rating. It's fine. I'm happy to have you change, and we change it. There have been a few that said, nope, if you can't give me that one project, I'm out of here. I want.
And before you respond to that scenario, Roger, that a question came in asking about that. So MK Malone asks, seems like a student could game this system, set everything to no interest except the one they want. Any thoughts on avoiding this? And I'll tell you, when I've talked to some schools about this recently, this comes up a lot. People are worried about gaming this process. So talk us through what your result has been.
First of all, the answer is, how often does that happen? And my experience is that it happens very seldom. I would guess only 1 or 2 times a year. A small handful of times a semester will I get somebody. Well, now let me say it differently. Will I get a person where I can't give them what they want because they only had one thing that they wanted, and either I had too many people that wanted that one thing, or I didn't think that they were qualified for that one thing. So I would get a small percentage. I mean, just, 1s and 2s and 3s where that would happen. How often would I have somebody that only had one? That probably 10% of the time or something, or 5% of the time, would somebody just have only one thing that they wanted to do. But if all I've got is, if it turns out that, I want 5 people on a team, and I got 3 people who said that's the only one they want, and I've got 2 other people who wanted that along with other things, and I was able to build a 5-person team. Who cares that they, as you called it, game the system? The only time it's a problem is if I get a whole bunch of people gaming it to get one project that everybody wants. And when that happens, again, you've got the situation of, I go back to those people and I say, if you want to be in the class, I can't put you on that project. Either you're not qualified, or I have too many people on that project. And then the answer is, I can't, let's talk about other options. And do you really care? And do you want something? So that's what I've done in the past. And like I said, it's worked well.
Real quick, Roger. So I've had a similar reaction when people say, I'm worried about gaming. I mean, remember, this process is designed to suss out priority and interest level. And if someone goes to the effort to say, look, all my eggs are in this one basket, that's a strong signal. It's still a valid signal, but where it could cause issues is if you have a lot of people doing it. So I think what you're saying is there's not that critical mass, at least in your case at your school, but there are lots of thousands of students who've gone through this with you. There hasn't been a critical mass that's disrupted placement. I would also submit, what if you told the students, look, if you do put all your eggs in one basket, you may not get that. And if you don't, I have no other information. So it's then random. And so it's on them. I mean, there's just sort of a built-in protection against that, because they're making they're all in, so to speak, if they were betting, and you can lose that bet. And that's just the reality of participating here and not giving you a lot of options.
Well, and so that's a really good point you bring up. And so you would say if that was a really big issue, that would have caused me a lot of trouble with 500 to 1,000 students in a semester. And what I have to tell you is it was never a problem. I mean, at most, it was 1 or 2 or 3 students that I had to call and talk through the issue with. So it did not turn into a problem for me. And if you're only running, 5 or 7, 8 projects, maybe you'd have a little bit more chance of that happening, but you also have not very many people you got to talk to and discuss with it. So again, this becomes the problem. It's more of a problem when it's required, because the ones who said, if I can't have that project, I'm not going to participate, then the answer is, I'm sorry, I can't put you on the project, and they drop the class. Again, I've had that maybe once or twice a semester, or maybe even less than that. But that it hasn't turned out to be a big problem. So anyway, this is the scale that I use. Now, we have the scale that Dr. Sampson brought up, which was preferred, acceptable, not acceptable. That's fine. I don't find as much differentiation there on this preferred. I might end up with a block of projects that are in that preferred. And then how do I tell between them? Is there any difference? And so I like the 5-point scale because it gives an opportunity to differentiate preferred. Are there levels of preferred? And I like having that extra piece of data. So I like to start with all projects listed as no interest level, and the students has to change the rating to their preferred rating. This way, they only have to rate the projects they're interested in, and all of the others remain in no interest. All right, so now here, this is kind of fun, and I just want to help walk you through the logic of why I care about this. If I use a ranking system, every single student is going to look like this. They're going to have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, every one of them. And I've got to look at this and say, okay, which one can I put them on? And if it turns out that there's enough variety, I can put everybody on their number ones, then there's no problem here. This is easy. But I've never had that happen. There's never been a time when I could put everybody on their number one project. So as soon as I have to start dropping down to 2, 3, 4, 5, now the question becomes to me, how much difference is that? And particularly since I'm trying to build teams of common sets of skills, and I may have a multifunctional team where I'm going to have a marketing person and a finance person and a supply chain person, maybe an HR person, all on the same project because it's a multifunctional project. I need to find people that have those skill sets to make that project work well. And now I'm not only looking at the ranking and the rating, I'm looking at the skill sets necessary for that team. And so now I've got a lot more things to worry about. So this ranking leaves me with not a lot of insight because of the ordinality of I don't know the difference. How much difference for this student is there between 1 and 2 and between 2 and 3 and between 3 and 4? I don't know the answer. So let's look at a couple different students that we might have. So if we use a variety of rating outcomes for the same 10 projects by different students, this first student, they're saying, if you give me my number 1 or my number 2, I'm good. Either one of those, great, I'm happy with. 3 or 4, pretty good. I'm still going to feel pretty good. If you give me 5, 6, or 7, I'm okay. I'm not excited, but I'm okay. If you give me 8, 9, or 10, yeah, you've lost my excitement. You've lost my enthusiasm. This is a hard push for me. But there's really no projects that I wouldn't do. So that's student number 1. Now I have an idea of how they think. Let's look at student number 2. In this case, their number 1 is way more important to them than 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are all moderate interest. I would do them, but really that number 1, that's the one I really want. And 9 or 10, I don't want those. Those are way out of my range. I have no interest. Now let's compare that to student number 3. In this case, any one of 1, 2, or 3 really excited about, and I really am not very interested in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And again, I don't want to do 9 or 10 at all. So again, now I'm getting a feel for where this student is. But let's look at student number 4 here. Now, in this case, I do have a clear number 1, but 2, 3, 4, and 5, they're, I'm still pretty excited about them. But 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I don't want to do. So again, now I'm getting a different view of this student and what they care about. Let's look at student number 5 here. Now I get a lot of these, and they actually, it's both heartening. It's something that's really valuable to me, but it's also, I wonder about, do they really know what they want? If they've got 8 projects that any one of those is they're very high, I wonder about them. But the truth is, these students are wonderful because I can use them to fill in teams. When I've got a team out here and I've got 4 on it, and I just need to add 1 more, and I'm not sure who to add, and I don't have people pounding on the door to get into that project, then I can fill in with these students who have 8 projects in the very high and 9 in the high. Those students make it really easy to fill teams out. So to be truthful with you, I often leave these students toward the end. I don't place them on a team until the end because they become my ability to balance out teams. So when I have students like this, I tend to hold them toward the end because they're very helpful in balancing. By the way, sometimes when I'm doing this, I'll take the people who they only have 1 project, and I'll go ahead in the early time when I'm not telling them what I'm doing yet. I'm just trying out. I'm looking at the teams. I'll put them on the team and see if I run into a problem. So once I've got all the people placed who are, only have 1 or just 2 top things, I'll place them on just to see how that makes the teams balance. And if I can do that, then I don't have any trouble and I go on. If I can't do that, if I can't get all those people onto the projects they want because there's too many, then I know I've got to start dealing with some issues. Lastly, here's a student who has their 1, 2 at the top, then 3, and then everything down at the bottom. So basically, if I can get them on any of their top 3, I'm going to be okay. Now, look at this richness that we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 students. Look how rich the information is. And then look back at ranking and imagine I have 6 students and I've got the same information for each one of them on ranking. Which would you rather have? If you're trying to create a really enjoyable, exciting, valuable experience for the students, which would you rather have? Would you rather have this rich, deep set of information, or would you rather have 6 of these list of rankings that you don't know what's the difference between them?
Roger, we've got a question here from Wayne France. With a system like this, a rating system, how many more projects do you have to source, anticipating that some may have no interest from students? So I think what he's implying here is, are you more likely to end up with excess projects you can't match because, well, people gravitate toward the top?
Now, that's a fabulous question. And I'm a huge believer in, I want students doing what they want to do. Now, so if you are, and again, this is whether people are paying or you're doing them for free or whatever. I've done it both ways. For our MBA projects, we charge $5,000 to $15,000, and for the undergraduates, we chose not to charge for those because we wanted to maximize the number of students who could participate.
And it's pretty common, by the way, to charge in grad but not undergrad.
Yeah, that is pretty common. But if you're going to have 1,000 students a semester, it's hard to find people that will pay to have 1,000 students a semester. And so we chose numbers over income because we really wanted to have more students participating. So I took it was my decision at the time, and I said, I am going to oversource projects. Even on the paid ones, I oversourced projects. And so I would normally have, at the graduate level, I would have 5 to 10 projects that I didn't source because I didn't have enough students for it. And at the undergraduate level, I'd have 90 to 120 projects that I didn't source because I didn't have enough students. So that was when I was at BYU. This semester here, I had 32 projects submitted for BYU Hawaii, and we did 17 this semester. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, that's going to make these people really unhappy with me and upset and everything. And so what I tell them is, if you don't get a project team this semester, if you will roll it over to the next semester, then I will fill your projects first, when they come in. Because because of these ratings, I can put students on different projects, and I can preferentially fill a company. So I tell them, if you roll it over to them next semester, I will preferentially fill your projects first, so that you do get a team the next semester. What I find is 90% of the companies who roll it over do get a team the next semester. And the 10% that don't, it just wasn't an interesting project for the students. I have had people who rolled it over a third time and did get a team. And then there's others who rolled it over a third time and they just never, the students didn't want to do that project. So yes, it can happen that way, but I'm a believer that this is about the students, not about the companies. I appreciate the companies. I love these people who help out our students, but this is about the students. And so I want them working on projects they care about. So the answer is yes, there are projects that don't get funded. Now, I've never had a situation where I only had the same number of projects as I had students. I've always had more projects because that was my priority. So I don't know what would happen if I only had the exact same number of projects as I do students. I just don't have any experience with that because I've never chosen to do that.
We have a couple other questions I want to get to, but before we move on, I think underlying that question is an assumption that if you're doing rating or scoring, and for the record, so you mentioned, hey, we like to call it scoring. So we've built support for everything Roger's talking about into our product. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Some of you on the call are clients and you're probably thinking, hey, I've never seen that before. It's brand new. It's only been there a couple of weeks, but we called it scoring because rating and ranking look similar. And when you select in a dropdown, it's super easy to hit the wrong one. I've even talking to my team about this, I would say the wrong thing all the time. And I figured, well, if we're goofing it up, we should probably call it that. But rating really is what it is. But do you agree with that premise that by doing rating instead of ranking, you're more likely to suss out projects that aren't actually, are you more likely to have overflow projects? Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think so. Because when the first couple of years that I did this, I did ranking, and I had, again, oversourced projects because that was my choice. I don't think you have a bigger problem with not having projects that students want to be on, because what's going to happen is if they don't want to be on them, they're going to be down there at 9 and 10. And unless you have exactly matched projects to students, and even then you're going to end up putting students on their lowest ranked projects. So no, I don't think that rating versus ranking is going to increase that problem. I think it's going to be the same issue.
And I know when it comes to ranking, like you see on Roger's slide, he's got 1 through 10. The reality is 3 or 5 are much more common ranking sequences. But for schools that want to create as many possible positive outcomes as possible, they'll go bigger and bigger, maybe all the way up to 10. I've seen even more than that, but it's pretty rare. But I think with ranking, rating, or scoring as we call it, it's the same thing. So in our system, you can pick how many tiers do you want to allocate. And they don't necessarily have to fill them all out, but you're giving them more flexibility and more granularity to say, this is a tier 4 project, but if you just gave them 3, they might have fewer wins. So that's one way to manage that potentially to that question. So there are 2 other questions here that I think are complementary, Roger. So I'm going to read them real quick, if that's okay with you, and then get your thoughts.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So first is from Kate Partridge. Do you tell the students ahead of time who the client or corporate partner is? At Eller, at Arizona, that is the business school, when putting the projects out to the students for their preferences, we only give them a 1 sentence high level scope of work, not the client name, to avoid what you're describing, I believe. For reference, this is a required course, and I guarantee a lot of people on this call have required courses, and we're currently running 16 projects. For project selection, they rank their top 4, which we just talked about, and then we place them on teams based on their preferences, skill, and experience level. And before I let you answer that, I have not identified any common best practice here. And maybe Roger, if you can illuminate on this, but what we've done is we let schools select when they do bidding in EduSourced like Roger does, they can pick which information is shared. And so some schools do just a 1 sentence summary, which is what Kate just described. Some schools hide the client name, but some schools don't. Some schools want max transparency. And then the other question, this is related, so hopefully this isn't too much to keep straight, but Kevin Barron from Ohio State says, when proposing projects to students, how much info do you share with them? So that's what we're talking about here. Do you always share the company names ahead of rating or ranking? Or do you ever redact the names to force the students to rate based on something else? So you mentioned at the beginning, Roger, you don't necessarily know which projects are going to be hit. I know I've heard from a number of schools, hey, they've got the project from Google or Tesla or SpaceX. We see all these big names come up on EduSourced. Schools tell us that's where the students flock. They want to go to the big name project, but you're saying maybe not in your case, but do you have a reaction to either Kate or Kevin's questions?
All right, so that's a good question. So there's always going to be the students who want to flock to the big names. There's that you're just going to have that. There are going to be students who that's what's important to them. But I'm going to tell you that from my experience, and again, I'm talking about large groups of students, I would say at the undergraduate level, that's probably 25% of the students are going to flock to the big name. And probably 75% are going to look at other stuff. At the MBA level, I would say it's closer to 50 to 70% who will flock to the big name because they are just much more about career and job placement, I think, than the undergraduates are. But I'm kind of, I came from industry. I'm not from academia. I'm all about transparency. That was in the company that I worked in. Transparency was really important. And so I had 30 years telling me, give people the best transparency. And in the end, you'll be happier if you do that. And so that's what I've done. I go for maximum transparency. I tell them everything I can. And
so they see the company name.
They see the company name. They see the majors that the company's requested. They see the project description, the short project 1 sentence description. And then I also include and give them the whole 2 or 3 paragraph description. I make all of that available to them during the rating process because, again, I believe more transparency is better than less. That's a personal preference. I'm not saying that other people who choose a different approach are wrong. I'm just saying that's my culture. That's where I came from, and that's how I do things. And so I can't tell you that that's the right and best thing to always do. I'm just telling you that's what I've always done, and I have not had a problem with it. Even with the MBAs, I would run 100 to 150 MBAs a semester, and I didn't. I ran Honeywell, I ran American Express, I ran Procter and Gamble, and then I ran tiny little nonprofits. And there would be people who wanted the tiny little nonprofit, and there'd be people who wanted Procter and Gamble. But I found that I was able to make it work. So it didn't turn out to be a huge problem for me.
I know at some schools, they'll hide the full project description in our product just for privacy reasons. Maybe they have an agreement with the company. They don't want the students to see more info until they're on the project, have signed an NDA. Don't know how common that is, but that's a concern for some. But yeah, you can definitely control if the student shouldn't see the company name. But I can say the standard in our system that most people use is a single line summary, project name, company name, and then category tags. So in other words, the academic disciplines involved are being requested. So company name is normally shared, but it doesn't have to be. It can be blocked out.
Well, let's wrap this up. So ranking versus rating, pros and cons. So in my opinion, ranking, the pros, everybody knows how it works. It's simple on short lists, works well. The cons, it's hard with long lists. You don't know how big the difference is between 1, 2, and 3. You don't know if there are some they would not do at all. Even if no interest difference to students between 1 and 5, they will be unhappy if you assign 5 because you force them to rank the projects. On rating, the pros, they know you know the relative student interest difference between projects. It allows there to be a number of projects that have equal student interest. Your forming teams is much easier for the faculty with a more clear view, can have hundreds of projects and students can just rate their favorites, and students are happy with any of their very high interest projects they're assigned to. The cons, you may have to explain how to do the ratings, but in the end, I don't think it's a lot different between ranking and rating on the satisfaction of the students when they only have 1 or 2 that they want to do. I haven't seen that to be as big of an issue. So David, that's all I had to present from a standpoint. Is there other questions and answers we want to discuss?
Yeah, we'll see if other questions pop up, and I'm going to show real quick, it's methodology is one thing and then tools are another. Certainly you can do everything Roger mentioned in Excel. The grand irony of all of this is we built this into EduSourced just now, just in time for Roger to retire, unfortunately, and not benefit from it. But we did build this with input from Roger, and then we've got another feature on top of it called Team Builder that's in progress right now that I think is really exciting. So I'm going to show that real quick. It'll just be a quick couple-minute preview. And we've got a question from Robert Hart at UT Dallas College of Engineering. Do you allow students to select people that they want to be on a team with when bidding? That's a really interesting question.
It's a great question. And I'm going to tell you that I've evolved on that answer. When I first started, I said, when I'm in a company, I don't get to choose who I'm with. I don't get to do that. And so I said, we are trying to emulate the real world as much as possible. And so my comment was early on, I said, nope, you get no say. You can't indicate people you want to be with. You're going to get put with whoever I put you with, because that's what happens in the real world. I've thought, I've evolved on that thought process quite a bit over the last almost 15 years. And so kind of here's my answer today as I think about that. I will tell you that I'm aware of some schools where they have students create their own teams and then the teams bid on the projects. So they come up with their own 5 people in the class and then the team bids on a project for the 5 of them. I think that's too far. That my evolution has not gone that far. That's I don't think the real world works that way. But I do know that teams of people who want to be together, who are like each other, can be a great team. I had a team of students from the Philippines. Now we have a very international school here. 70% of our students are international. We have 79 different countries on campus, and the majority of our students are international students. So I had 3 young ladies from the Philippines who arbitrarily got put on the same team. They didn't ask. I randomly put them on that team, and they were just an amazing team. They worked together just so flawlessly. It turned out to be a fabulous project. So what I do now is I include, David has where you can put a comment into the bidding process. And so I allow them to put a comment to say, is there anybody that I would like to have on my team? That I'd like you to put me on a team with. And I basically tell the students, you better rank the same projects, because I'm not going to put 2 people on the same team when it forces me to put somebody on a low rated project to be with somebody else they want to be with. So I said, if there's no common project between the 2 of you, then I can't do that. But I will tell you that my experience is, like I have 2 teams this semester. One is an accounting team, a team that's doing accounting and tax preparation for an accounting company. 3 of the students on that project asked to be together, and they're all accountants, and that was pretty easy to do. I have another project for that team, by the way, is doing it for some alumni from Tonga and Mongolia. And then I have a team that's doing a project for one of the largest companies in the Philippines. And part of that project is computer programming of a database. And I have 3 students on that team who all asked to be together. And again, I didn't have that many computer programming projects, and so I was able to do that. And but most of the rest of the students in the class, we have about 60 in this class, most of them didn't have people that they put down that they wanted to be with. So it's a mix. And I think my feeling today is if I can put a few people on the team that they know and that they want to be with, that's probably not a bad idea. But do I want to make it where you go all the way to they form their own team and they try and bid on a project? I think that's too far. It's not like the real world. I'm trying to emulate as much as possible real world. And I'll just make one last comment on that. Everything we do in our class is related to what you would do in the real world. So we don't have anything we do in the class that is something you would do for the teacher. So in other words, I've turned all of my grading topics into things that they do for the clients and things they would do if the clients aren't asking. I have them turn in goals at the beginning. I have them turn in accomplishments and impacts at the end. Not every client asks for that, but in a real world job, they would ask for that. So I have them turn that in because it's a real world thing that they would do. And I use everything that we do for grading. But again, for me, everything we do in the project is a real world thing. I don't do anything academically. I adapt the academic needs to what the students are experiencing from a real world standpoint. Those are my thoughts.
We have a couple other questions real quick. I'm just going to give some quick background on what we've built to support what Roger was talking about. So some of you on here are clients and some of you are familiar with us, but some of you maybe aren't. EduSourced is the product we built, and we think of it as the secure and private experiential learning platform. So it's really designed for schools who want to take control and management and ownership of their own ecosystem of employers and projects. We're not in the business of bringing you projects, but as a result of that, we don't take your projects and companies. You keep ownership of that. And our system is custom configured for each school we work with. So we have a ton of schools we work with, and they set up their options a little differently. So we know no 2 experiential programs are quite the same, which makes designing a product like this a little more challenging, but that's okay. It works out. So what Roger is talking about in this session is having students score or rate their projects. And like I mentioned earlier, we went with the word scoring because you could see in our drop down here, ranking or rating, easy to mix that up. I like the word rating better. It was a big discussion in our team, but at the end of the day, scoring is just clearer. So we went with that. But when you open up bidding, you determine if you want the students to score their top choices now. And for anyone who's watching this, who's used our product for bidding this semester, we just released this a week or 2 ago. So you may not have seen this yet, but you can pick between the 2 methodologies. And of course, you could skip this and just add students to the projects directly. But I think most of our schools use this bidding workflow. And once you're done with bidding, the students get an email and they click a link and they go right to a view of all their projects. And you can hide the client name, you can hide the company or even project details. You can really manicure how much info you want to share. The key for us is the students click that link and they don't need to log in. They just go straight there. It skips login. It's meant to be seamless. And the reason for that is because this is usually done at the beginning of the term, right when class kicks off. And you probably don't have a lot of time to explain to them, hey, we're using this tool. Here's all this detail. No, it has to be dead simple. And that's what I think we've accomplished. Here's what we've been missing though in the past that we're working on right now that I'm very excited about. This is Team Builder. It's completely integrated with bidding. This is just a prototype view. We're building this spring. It will be out in the summer. So this may change a little bit, but just to give you an idea, it does a few things. One, you collect inputs from all of your students, which you can already do in EduSourced, but then it gives you an interface for staging those students. And I don't know how we missed this, but originally we didn't come up with this idea. You collect bidding results and you add students to projects. But for a lot of programs, they want to stage things out before they finalize. And that's one of the reasons I'm really excited about this. But it also has an automated first pass matching. So especially for our larger programs, they kind of want to click a button and do an initial matching. But they're usually not looking for everything to be totally finalized. They want to go over this by hand. They want to make sure that they agree with the teams as they're allocated. So this is, optionally, you can click to do a first pass match and then you go through it and you finalize the teams. And when you're done, one click and everybody's out. Now, you can import your teams and do it that way. You can do your own processing in Excel with this feature and import it and then automatically create all your teams. That's going to be new too. But I think the main event here is there's a full interface for staging, and we're designing this to work with really large programs as well as small ones. But small ones are kind of easier to account for. It's the big ones that are sort of scary. And then you get at a glance view of more information about the students. There's a question we'll get to in a moment from Don Tollinen at Xavier about, what happens if you need students from different disciplines and backgrounds. So this way you can see, okay, I'm contemplating adding a student to a particular team, but what is more information about their background? And then that's it for my kind of pitch, but that's one little element of EduSourced. If you want to know more about our platform for experiential learning, you'll get a question at the end of the session. And if you answer that yes, you want to hear about it, my team will get in touch with you. Our benchmarking survey is open now. I mentioned that at the beginning, but that is, I believe, the world's biggest data set on experiential learning. And we ask a lot of detailed questions about experiential programs and then publish the results. And if you complete the survey, you'll get the results first. There's a link at the bottom of our page at edusourced.com, or you could just use this link here and go straight there. So with all of that, let's look at a couple of these questions that came through. And if you have any other final questions, please let us know in the chat or in the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll get you covered. So Don Tollinen asked, what if all students who want a project are from a specific discipline? For example, they're all accountants, but the company needs other disciplines. Roger, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's two different issues here. One is if the highest preference is all one major, and now I'm going to have to turn some of those guys down so that I can build in the other resources I need. In that case, you just have to do it because you do need to have a balanced team. Where there's a bigger problem is where you only have people from one major, and you don't have anybody from the other majors that are willing to work on that team. In this case, in some cases, I've gone out and tried to recruit. I've gone to the internship coordinators in that major. So I'm doing a project right now for the state of Alaska and the Department of Commerce. And they wanted political science students on this project. But most of the students who wanted to do it, because it's going to end up marketing the export products of the state of Alaska, they wanted to, a lot of marketing students wanted to be on it, and supply chain students. And I didn't have any political science students that wanted to be on the project. So I had to go out and recruit political science students to that project because they wanted students they could eventually hire down the road and to be on the team. And so I had to go recruit them. There have been other times, there's a project out of Philadelphia that we're doing with an app. And we've actually worked with this company on 3 different semesters. And our students have done basically all of the programming related to this app and its usage. And this semester, I didn't have enough computer people. They wanted a mix of marketing and computer. And I didn't have enough computer people that I could put on this project this semester. And so we didn't do the project this semester because I just didn't have enough of that discipline to make the team a balanced team of what I was trying to do. So those are the 2 different ways I handle it. I either try and go and recruit if I don't have the right majors to do the project, or I choose not to do the project that semester and roll it to the next. And then I do more recruiting in the between semesters to see if and knowing that project's there, I'll go to that club, I'll go to an organization, I'll go to that major, and I will let them know that we have this project coming up and we'd really like to have somebody from their majors. At BYU Provo, I would normally have 70 to 80 different majors per semester. That many different majors would be involved in a given semester. So I know what it's like to try and match up projects. I know some of these classes are just one major and everything you're doing is one, but multidisciplinary is, I believe, how the real world works. There are very few projects in my career that I ever did that was single disciplinary. So I try to have mostly multidisciplinary projects.
And Robert Aimling asked, will we have access to this recording? Yeah, it'll be posted on edusourced.com in a couple of days, and we'll email out a link so you can access that. Beth DiBartolo from RIT had an interesting comment to an earlier question, Roger, and it was about your point, asking students to identify if there's a particular student maybe they want to work with. She says, or people they don't want to work with, that could be good to know too. And I imagine that's probably true.
Yeah, I did have a young lady who had been harassed by somebody, and they were on the same team. In that case, I did not take her off the team. I took him off the team and put him on a different team because I didn't think she should be penalized because of that circumstance. I didn't have any trouble on the, and I think I did put him on a team of mainly one gender. So, but yes, I think that's totally reasonable. I haven't had very many situations where that's been a problem, but it can be a problem, and we should be aware of it.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate you sharing this with us. And for everyone who joined, thanks for coming. We do other webinars like this a couple times a year. So if you're interested in that, go to edusourced.com. There's a button at the top for Experiential Academy, and that's where we post all of these recordings. So there are others. And we'll be going live again in a couple months to put a panel together and discuss the results of this benchmark, because we do it every year so we can start to look at trend data. I think this is our fourth, or it might even be our fifth year conducting this survey. So I'm excited to see what the results. So Roger, thank you again for your time and your 15 plus years of service and experiential learning. I know a lot of people are listening have a lot of experience too. So it's just always wonderful to get to learn from you folks. All right. And with that, we'll wish everybody a nice rest of your day, and we'll talk with you soon.
Aloha.